Hello, everyone, and thanks for taking time out to view my channel. Yes, I'm back up to almost 100%. I am feeling much better. Thanks for all the comments and well wishes. I appreciate that. I'm going to do a little something that's probably not related to the Philippines, but it was a part of my life in my early working years. Actually, it was my first job. Now, this is in the early 70s, and those that are old enough that live in the U.S., you might recall what they called the coal boom. Well, as a young man, I acquired skills like welding, and I was mechanically inclined, and I could figure things out fairly easy. So I was hired at what the terminology was called a tipple, which is actually a coal processing plant that crushed the coal down to a certain size, which would be acceptable to electric companies. And ours was at 1.25 inches. I was hired for the big labor of $2.50 an hour. Now, my skills allowed me to do a lot of maintenance work and repair. I had electrical knowledge also. Our first couple of weeks on that particular first tipple was getting it up to par safety standards of that time to start production of coal. They bought a brand new international loader. They call it a Huff 65 with the oversized bucket for coal. Now, I had been on several pieces of equipment prior to this. I had run backhoes and some mining equipment at odd jobs that I was doing while I was in school. So it was a natural thing for me to just jump on that brand new loader and been able to operate it. While we were working on this processing plant, the company was buying coal and stockpiling. It took about 2 weeks to get it up to par and get the inspection required to start using the tipple. Now, I could weld also at that time. So there was a lot of maintenance work and welding things like guards and so forth and catwalks in place. And had to repair. The first repair I did was on the winch, which was used to pull the railroad cars as you load them. The original switch they was using was a manual throw switch. And it was worn out. So I replaced it with a relay box and a push button switch, which saved them a considerable amount of money from having a electrical company come in and do all this wiring and so forth. So I got the winch up and running. I don't know if anybody's experienced pulling a winch cable back several hundred feet by hand with a big heavy hook that probably weighed, I would estimate, I can't remember the weight on it, but it probably weighed 40 pounds. With a 3/4 inch, it might have even been a 1-inch cable, I just don't recall, cable. And the further you pull it, the harder it is to pull. I was a stocky young man. I was able to do this. And you have to inspect each car individually, make sure it doesn't have foreign material in it. And you have to close those car doors with this big breaker bar and a 10-pound sledgehammer. But the good thing about that is I'm left and right-handed. So I could use the hammer pretty accurate with either hand. So that means when I went down one side, closing car doors, I could come up the other side and do it too without having a second person swinging, because most people are right-handed only. There's very few left-handed people. So that saved a lot of time, and also saved from hiring a second person. Or a third person in my case. There's two of us. Everything we got things up and running. There was a 10-car siding. I've got it to where we can load those 10 cars out. In most cases, it was 100-ton cars. Most of those cars at that time were fairly new. The railroad cars, by the way. And at that time we started usually around 6 a.m. Well, by 10:30, we'd have those cars loaded out. And basically, then after that, what I would do would shovel around the end of the belt line and upstairs where the shaker building is, clean up, shovel up all the coal dust and so forth that fell. Well, during those years, you do know, as far as personal safety, the only thing required was a hard hat. There wasn't no dust mask, no ear protection required. And that shaker building got quite noisy. Well, everything is fine and dandy. We started getting what they call extra cars. In other words, the railroad would come in and pull those loaded cars out and give us 10 more empties to load. Well, our days ended up being 12, 14-hour days. We still could be loaded out by 2:30, something like that, again. And these trucks were coming in, loaded. We had a scale house. I'd weigh them, direct them to the stockpile, use the loader to stack the coal. When we couldn't load it in the cars because we'd loaded out. And during that time, the price of coal was up there. In some cases, it got close to $100 a ton. So you can imagine how much money we was making for the company we was working for. I get $2.50 an hour. After a year, I got a raise. I got $3 an hour. And they acquired a lease on 2 additional loadouts. One was an 8-car loadout. The other one was 18. Did they hire extra people? No. They give me a raise? No. But we was working 3 different loadouts and loading each one of them out every day. And one was the 10-car loadout. They'd get loaded out twice a day. And the 8-car siding, occasionally we could get extra on it. Then most days it was 8 cars. And the 18-car siding, it was rare to get extra. Maybe once or twice a month. I was working, as you realize now, over 3 times the labor on the same amount of money. After another year, I got another 50 cent on the hour raise. And they did hire me a helper for the same pay I was getting. And he had no knowledge at all. I did my best to train him, but in order to keep things going, I didn't have a lot of time to be a babysitter. After 2 weeks on the job, he managed to get his hand broken. Did they lay him off? No. They kept him on board. So I thought he had one good hand, maybe he could push buttons. No. On the 18 car siding, what I call the number one belt, that's the one that actually dumped the coal into the cars. You could actually pause it because they were a small hopper, so you could pull the next car in place and start loading. And you didn't slow production down. I never could get him to understand that. He shut the whole thing down. And we had a hammer mill crusher on that particular loadout. And it took it about 5 minutes to get fired back up again so it could be able to produce it. It was slow at getting started up. So he was costing production time. I ended up, I was the one checking the cars out, pulling the cables back, closing the car doors, running the inloader, weighing the coal. I was doing all the work, period, and all the cleanup. I mean, you're getting the same pay. And you were doing, pushing buttons. But anyway, during that time, I'm still running the other two plants. I did this for right at 5 years. And I finally said enough's enough. And I informed them that I was going to take on another job. I actually knew a person that was running what they call a strip job. At double the pay I was getting at that time. You think they tried to match that pay? No, they let me go. So I went to work on a strip job for $8 an hour. Which at that time was pretty darn good money. Now, that's not the end of the story. That job I was working 12, 14, 16-hour days at, when it come time to turn my time in, I always got shorted. So normally I wouldn't get paid for over 10 hours, even though I worked 14, 16. A lot of overtime lost. Again, that's not the end of the story, which doesn't make sense. When I left, they hired 4 more people at a lot bigger salary. A lot bigger. $7.50 an hour. But you know what? Even though they hired 4 people to do the work I was doing, they still had to hire outside people to come in and do repairs and maintenance. Because none of those ever had experience or even knew what to do. when they had a problem. They just shut it down. From the time I left, and I worked another job, which would, through the word of mouth, I understood, they never could meet production quota and rarely got a full day of loadout. Of course, that company's no longer in business, or it closed short time afterwards, about a year after I left. It closed, shut down, pulled up roots, and that was it. And I worked happily at the strip job, running main loader and loading rock and so forth. And I worked what they call a night shift, and it was 11 hours. And we got a 1 hour lunch break, which it blew my mind. I got a break and got paid for it. And the owner of the company often would visit, and for some odd reason he liked me, and I got a raise, a substantial raise. He gave me $10 an hour, $2 on the hour. This was a short time after I was there. I mean, like 4 or 5 months, something like that. And we loaded those rock trucks and uncovered the coal seam. For those that are familiar with that, my job basically was just moving rock, dirt, so forth, after they'd done their blast. And they always kept a dozer pushing to me so I could have loose soil or loose material to load the rock truck. And then I got to advance. I like that because they had a nice 800 Laterno. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but this is a huge inverter. I mean, huge. And you could use that loader into a place freshly shot. You didn't have to have a dozer pushing to it. And that was the simplest piece of equipment I ever operated. And again, I got another raise. Well, that job lasted almost 2 years. And that's when I went underground, because that company also shut down. And again, I was on night shift. Started out at I think around $10, $11 an hour, something like that. I know it's just under $11. I hadn't been there just a few months that I run into a guy I knew that knew me, and he happened to be the main evening shift supervisor. I want to know why I was working general labor. That's because I liked it. It was different every night. So he put me on the mining section. These were called double barrels. In other words, that section had 2 miners on it. And my first job was running a shuttle car, which gave me an increase in pay. And I worked my 8-hour shifts like that. Union job, good benefits, loved it. And then I was also the loadout man. I was a young man, I didn't have a full understanding. But often I would end up on the miner operating in. And miner pay was the highest paying job on the section, other than an electrician. And I had put enough hours in, I got miner pay. Well, I was saving money, living good. You know, young man, doing so well. Good benefits, good health care. Then the end came. That's when I had my accident. Because on that particular section was the main line of the main belt. And on the belt line part of the drive, you always cut the top out high enough so you can get that equipment in there and move the belt line deeper into the mine. And that particular part of the mine used conventional steel instead of the resin bolts that was used. Resin bolts is a glue. We had shell top. And the conventional belts were just like it's described. They got a chuck on the end that spreads, and then you got the plate and header, and you just tighten it up. And you can remove those. Well, it wasn't uncommon for us to take those bolts down and load those holes with dynamite and bring the top down to make room for the equipment on the main belt, and replace with resin bolts. Now, I could run a roof bolter too, but if you're curious, I did that quite often. And their scoops was a natural. Been in the process of renewing that conventional steel. Shell rock broke out, and that was the end of my job. No more getting that top pay, no more benefits. Just one disaster after another. And naturally, doctors wouldn't give me 100% release, so I couldn't get my job back. Trying to get work at any other place that required physicals, no. So that ended my coal career, unfortunately. That big pay, and my future in coal became history. But I thought people should know a little bit about my work background. And I'll add more to it in time, what I end up doing. But that was the beginning of my work history. I still think about it, how things could be different if that hadn't happened. Of course, would I be here? That's often crossed my mind. And I want to tell everyone, I really appreciate you taking time out in your day, or evening, or whenever you watch this video. I really appreciate it. So, stay tuned, and I'll fill you in on more on different things, and I even talk about the Philippines. Thanks for watching.